In 1998, the world lost one of its brightest comedy stars, Flip Wilson. He had once been loved by millions, hosted one of the biggest TV shows in America, and made people laugh so hard that families would gather around the television just to watch him. But when he passed away at only 64 years old, his life ended in mystery and sadness. A young fan, curious about the man who once ruled television, found his way into Wilson's Malibu home after his death. What he saw inside was not the glamorous mansion of a superstar. Instead, he found journals, tapes, and scattered evidence of a life full of secrets, pain, and broken dreams. This discovery revealed stories that the public never knew, stories of betrayal, loneliness, and struggles that haunted Wilson from childhood until the end of his days. It was shocking, not because Flip Wilson wasn't funny, but because behind every joke he ever told, there was a scar he had been hiding. Flip Wilson was not born into fame or comfort. His real name was Clara Wilson Jr., and he entered the world on December 8, 1933, in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was the 10th child in a family of 18, squeezed into a small home during the Great Depression. His father worked as a handyman, but could only earn about $15 a week, barely enough to feed so many mouths. Things took a heartbreaking turn on Christmas Eve in 1940 when Flip was just 7 years old. That night, his mother walked out on the family without saying a word. She took furniture, clothes, food, and left her children with nothing. Neighbors would later remember seeing the kids digging through garbage cans for scraps. Soon, the state took them away one by one, placing them in foster homes. For Flip, this was the moment he learned to hide his feelings. He turned to humor as his shield, making jokes so that nobody could see the pain he carried. But no amount of laughter could erase the memory of being abandoned on Christmas Eve by the person he needed most. Many people imagine foster care as a safe place for children. But for Flip Wilson, it was the opposite. He bounced from one foster home to another, each one leaving its own marks on him. In some homes, he was beaten for small mistakes, like wetting the bed. In one cruel household, his foster father forced him to sit perfectly still with a piece of cardboard on his lap, hiding gambling cards. If he moved, he was headbutted. At just 10 years old, Flip learned that punishment could come at any moment, even when he had done nothing wrong. He ran away several times, sometimes hiding in sewer pipes or on the streets, just to escape the abuse. By the time he was 12, he had already lived in more than half a dozen foster homes. These experiences taught him not to trust easily, and even later in life, when he was surrounded by fans and friends, a part of him remained that lonely boy, waiting for something to be taken away. His laughter on stage would make people happy, but inside, his childhood memories were still alive like open wounds. Amid the sadness, there was one light in Flip's early life. A family friend named Leroy Tiller turned out to be his biological father. Tiller was not wealthy, but he was kind and had a background in vaudeville, which meant he knew about comedy and performance. Between 1943 and 1945, Tiller took Flip to the Apollo Theater in Harlem, sometimes sneaking him backstage to watch performers. These small acts of kindness gave Flip something to dream about. In 1944, Tiller gave him a harmonica, which Flip used to play on the streets to earn money for food. For a boy who had lived through so much cruelty, these moments were priceless. Sadly, Tiller died in 1946, and Flip lost the one adult who had shown him real care. Yet, the seeds had been planted. Comedy and performance became his way out. And even when he faced hunger and rejection, Flip held on to those memories of Harlem stages and laughter. They would become the fuel for the career that later made him famous. By his teenage years, Flip was desperate to escape the cycle of poverty and pain. At just 16, he forged his birth certificate to claim he was 18 and joined the United States Air Force. For the first time in his life, he had steady meals and a place to sleep. But more importantly, he discovered something that would change his future forever. People loved his stories and impressions. While serving at Travis Air Force Base in California, he entertained fellow airmen with characters he invented on the spot. Nagging grandmothers, clumsy sergeants, and exaggerated versions of the officers around them. Laughter followed him everywhere, and the nickname Flip was born during these years. Even though racism was still present in the military, Flip used comedy to bring people together. Soldiers who were once divided by color lines laughed side by side when he performed. It was here that Flip learned the true power of humor. It could heal, unite, and hide the deepest pain all at once. When Flip left the Air Force in 1954, he had little money but a burning dream to make it in comedy. The road was long and harsh. He performed in small clubs for just a few dollars a night and often slept in his car. He toured the Chitlin Circuit, a group of clubs where black performers could work. But conditions were rough, and pay was low. Still, Flip kept sharpening his act. His comedy was unique because it came straight from his real-life jokes about being abandoned, jokes about strict foster parents, even jokes about race and poverty. In 1965, his persistence paid off when Red Fox praised him on national television, calling him the funniest comedian in the country. That moment opened the doors to The Tonight Show, where Flip's first appearance made audiences roar with laughter. From then on, his career skyrocketed. By the late 1960s, Flip Wilson was a household name, admired for his clever characters and his ability to make people laugh without bitterness. Even though his own life had been filled with bitterness from the start in 1970, Flip achieved what no black comedian before him had done. He launched and hosted his own primetime variety show on NBC. The Flip Wilson Show was a huge success. Watched by more than 40 million people each week, his character, Geraldine Jones, with her catchphrase, "The devil made me do it," became a cultural phenomenon. People repeated her lines in everyday conversation, and Flip won Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe. He became one of the highest-paid entertainers of his time, making around $60,000 per episode. Yet, fame came with pressure. Flip felt he was representing not only himself, but also an entire race of performers. Every mistake, every joke, was judged under a harsh spotlight. Behind the cameras, he battled anxiety and exhaustion, often working from early morning until midnight. To keep up, he began using drugs, especially cocaine, which slowly took control of his life. Success had given him wealth and power, but it also dragged him into habits that would eventually destroy much of what he had built. As the 1970s turned into the 1980s, the glamour of Flip Wilson's life began to fade. His show ended in 1974, and without it, his career never fully recovered. He faced lawsuits from ex-wives and former partners, paying millions in settlements and child support. Lavish spending, failed business deals, and drug habits drained his fortune. At his peak, he had earned nearly $15 million, but by the 1990s, most of it was gone. Flip became more isolated, withdrawing from family and friends. He lived in his Malibu home, going on cruises and flying hot air balloons. But these were distractions from a life filled with regret. By the time he was diagnosed with liver cancer in 1998, years of drug and alcohol abuse had taken their toll. On November 25, 1998, Flip Wilson died in his sleep, far from the roaring applause he once knew. His daughter Michelle was at his side, but most of his other family ties were broken. The young fan who later entered his empty home found not the image of a superstar, but the quiet evidence of a man who had been running from his past his whole life. Even though Flip Wilson's final years were sad, his legacy continues to shine. He broke barriers by becoming the first black man to host a successful variety show in America. He inspired comedians like Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, and Dave Chappelle, who all admired his ability to turn pain into humor. His character, Geraldine, remains iconic. Proof that comedy can cross boundaries and challenge society while still making people laugh. Behind every laugh, there was a man who had lived through abandonment, poverty, racism, and heartbreak. The journals and recordings found in his home revealed just how much he had suffered. But they also showed how he transformed that suffering into something powerful. Flip Wilson's story is not just about tragedy, it is about resilience. It reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, laughter can be a form of survival. And for millions who still remember his catchphrase, "What you see is what you get." Flip Wilson will always be remembered as the man who proved that humor can come from the deepest pain. Comedy has always been described as tragedy plus time, and Flip Wilson's career is a perfect example of this. To his audience, he was always cheerful, quick with a joke, and never afraid to laugh at himself. But the truth was that much of his comedy came directly from the pain he lived through as a child. Many comedians use humor as a defense mechanism, and Flip was no exception. Every time he stepped on stage, he was not just performing to entertain others, he was performing to cover up his own wounds. Friends later revealed that when the cameras stopped rolling, Flip was quiet and sometimes distant, as if he had left part of himself behind on stage. This was the hidden cost of his success. He gave people laughter, but it drained his spirit. Each time he heard the applause, he felt validated. But when the lights dimmed, he returned to his private battles with loneliness and mistrust. His story teaches us that fame can hide personal struggles, and even the brightest smile can be a mask for deep sadness. Flip Wilson's personal life was complicated, especially when it came to relationships. He was married twice and had 5 children, but his marriages ended in bitter divorces. His first wife, Lavinia Patricia Wilson, divorced him in 1967 after years of tension. Later, he married Cookie Mackenzie, but that marriage also collapsed. Court records show he was ordered to pay millions in settlements and child support, which added to his financial troubles. Beyond money though, Flip struggled with trust. Because he had been abandoned by his mother at such a young age, he carried deep fears of being left again. This often made him distant with the women in his life. Some partners described him as charming and loving in public, but cold and withdrawn in private. His children, too, felt his absence during certain years, as his career and personal demons consumed his time. Yet, despite these struggles, his kids have spoken of him with love, remembering him as a man who tried, even if he often failed. His relationships reveal the human side of fame, the difficulty of balancing success with family, and the emotional scars that never truly heal. Like many stars of the 1970s, Flip Wilson was caught in the dangerous world of drugs. At first, cocaine seemed like a way to keep up with the demands of television. Long rehearsals, late-night writing sessions, and constant pressure to perform drained his energy, and drugs became an escape. But what began as occasional use quickly grew into dependency. Cocaine affected his health, his mood, and his ability to focus. It also damaged his relationships and his finances, as large sums of money were spent to maintain the habit. By the 1980s, when his fame had begun to fade, drugs were no longer a tool for work, they were a way to forget the pain of losing the spotlight. This pattern is common among celebrities who rise too quickly and then struggle when the world moves on. For Flip, addiction was both a symptom of his inner battles and a cause of his downfall. It robbed him of time, money, and opportunities, and while he tried to fight it, the damage was lasting. His battle with drugs reminds us that behind the glamour of Hollywood, many stars are quietly struggling to survive. Despite his struggles, Flip Wilson's impact on comedy was undeniable. His humor was clever, playful, and often free of bitterness. Unlike some comedians who used anger as the basis for their jokes, Flip preferred charm. He created characters that audiences could relate to, like Geraldine Jones, Reverend Leroy, and Freddie Johnson. Geraldine, in particular, was groundbreaking. At a time when men dressing as women for comedy was rare on television, Flip brought her to life with confidence and respect. He did not use her to mock women, but to celebrate them, showing strength, sass, and independence. Geraldine's catchphrases entered everyday speech, and her character became a symbol of empowerment for many viewers. Flip also avoided racial stereotypes in his humor, choosing instead to present himself as simply a funny man who happened to be black, rather than a black comedian. This choice allowed him to reach wider audiences and break barriers. For those who came after him, his comedy style changed television by proving that humor could unite people across race, class, and gender. When Flip Wilson passed away in 1998, the Malibu home he left behind was not filled with trophies of success, but with echoes of his loneliness. The young fan who entered after his death expected to see luxury and wealth, but what he found was sobering. Old tapes of rehearsals, journals filled with personal thoughts, and scattered photographs painted a picture of a man who had been wrestling with himself and